Welcome. Thank you for braving the weather, for coming, and it's a great pleasure to kick off tomorrow's all-day colloquium on the subject of alchemy with this evening's lecture. It's a particular pleasure to introduce my colleague, David Brafman, who conceived this imaginative presentation of the GRI's very deep and wonderful collections on alchemy and related subjects. When we acquired the Manly Palmer Hall collection in the mid-90s, we knew there was a relationship between alchemy and art, but we had no idea how long this had been going on. And so that was something that David has really brought to light in a wonderful way. He's done an excellent job in drawing together and drawing out the various threads in the exhibition, and this was due in part to the excellent wisdom which was shared by experts on alchemy, some of whom will be speaking tomorrow. And we want to thank them very much for their contribution to this exhibition and to the idea of sharing their research with us along with the exhibition. So about David. Since 2002, David has been the Associate Curator of Rare Books at the Getty Research Institute. And before joining the Getty, he was a visiting professor in New York in the Classics Department at NYU. And he was also the resident expert at the premier rare book and manuscript dealer in New York, H.P. Krauss. And so this is the thing you need to know about David and his wisdom. He's from Brooklyn. He knew about Brooklyn before it became hipster paradise. And so he probably has some other secrets that he can share with you right now. But remember, he knew about Brooklyn before it was hip. His PhD is in classics and Arabic from Duke. And he's published and lectured widely curated exhibitions on subjects such as early Greek printed books, the art of memory, comparative religion in the Enlightenment, the history of Central Asian exploration, as well as working on alchemy and color theory, as he is now. But his most recent curatorial projects were on some things that are completely different. In 2014, he did a wonderful exhibition at ESMOA, El Segundo Museum of Art, and it was called Scratch. It was a collaboration with about, imagine this, 100 of LA's leading graffiti and tattoo artists. Imagine the committee meetings for that one. And they were inspired by rare calligraphy, perspective, and emblem books that they viewed in the GRI special collections. They responded enthusiastically, calligraphically, and artistically on the walls, on the ceiling, on the floor of ESMOA. It was an amazing exhibition that combined old and new ways of communication and art. Then, in 2015 and 16, David was a member of the curatorial committee for the recent Getty exhibition, Cave Temples of Dongwang Buddhist Art along the Silk Road. After our alchemy show closes in February 12th, it's going to be up less than a month now. 15 of its objects will go to Berlin for a related exhibition that David has collaborated with the curator on, the great art of alchemy, die große Kunst der Alchemie. And it will be at the Kulturforum in Berlin. After the exhibition closes, David's next project is the completion of a book that he's currently drafting on our alchemical collections. And so I think that will be very popular as well, given the response to the show. Please silence your cell phones. There is a special alchemical curse that David will deliver if yours rings. And please welcome David Brafman.
Thank you, Marcia. Is this on? If I saw, yeah, okay, it's on. All right, so yes, the first secret you should know about from New York is that the second that the Getty posted this on the web, every friend I had in New York called or sent me an email and said, "You've been in California too long, dude. Like, come back. This is," and I guess the second one is all my Getty friends have been making lots of really good jokes about how long I've been working on this project on alchemy. They're all really funny. I think my favorite one is, "You've been working on this show since your mama Maria Judea, Jewish Mary, invented the alembic at Alexandria in the 1st century." So here's actually a couple of slides. I started thinking, how long have I been working on this? But just a couple of preliminary slides of like why I took the direction that I ended up taking in. Oh, good, we don't have a date. I think it was, 2006, 2007? Gail Feigenbaum, another associate director at GRI, was putting together sort of this international, very big workshop on techne, which is the Greek word for art, craft, skill, where we get the word technology. And I was supposed to present something for it, and I saw this very scruffy, 3-foot-long engraved broadside in New York, an astrological calendar, a natural magic perpetual calendar. And I just whined and wheedled to Marcia, a little moment from the past. I just whined and whined and whined until she would let me buy it. And the reason that I wanted it was I had noticed right in that spot, don't drink Red Bull before your presentation, Hermes or Mercury hovering over apparatus of architecture, just a painter's palette, so architecture, art, and alchemy. That's an alembic, a vessel with a covered hood that's hermetically sealed. Get it? That my mother made in the 1st century. Also, what's abbreviated here, did we cut it? Oh, it sort of got cut off here. That it says that Mercury is, he presides over all colors. So that kind of intrigued me. About 5 years later, this intrigued me a little bit more. This was acquired as part of the Manly Hall collection, as Marcia had mentioned. It was acquired in 1995. Manly Hall was a theosophist and the founder of the Philosophical Research Society in Los Feliz, about 5 blocks away from where I live. I know 300 of you have heard a story, so I'm not going to tell it again. You guys can ask me after. But I always loved this manuscript, and I kept looking at it whenever I could. And one day I came across this line in Latin that said, "What is the philosopher's stone? It is red mercury." And I guess this is also where I admit that it was like my tragic destiny to do this show, because I got suspended from high school for skipping chemistry too many times. So there's a Brooklyn secret. Don't tell my mother. She knows, actually. But there was one thing that I knew, was that red mercury was vermilion paint pigment. So I went to a very close friend, Nancy Turner. I won't point the pointer at you. Nancy Turner is conservator of manuscripts at the museum, and really one of the smartest and nicest people I know. And it was really Nancy who pointed me to the relationship. It turned out she was looking at color pigments in alchemical recipes, and she really pointed me in the direction, I guess this was about 6 years ago, about the materiality of art. And she also pointed me to some of the people that Marcia mentioned, that there was just this phenomenal expertise at the Getty of people that understood, had looked at how different synthetic chemical techniques had been applied to the making of art objects. And that was sort of what got me going in that direction. So I do want to take the chance to thank you publicly, Nancy. Privately, I already thanked her. I gave her a bottle of single malt scotch, and her cell phone number is, these are all selfies of Nancy. No, she's a good friend. Thank you, Nancy. So, what is alchemy? I always stutter when everybody asks me this question. I still don't know the answer to it. At its basis, alchemy is the precursor, the ancestor to modern chemistry, and you could certainly approach the subject of alchemy by just looking at it along a timeline of the history of science. But like Victor Frankenstein once said, what's the fun of that, basically? What's sort of meant by when Thomas Aquinas' teacher, Albertus Magnus, probably at Paris, at the University of Paris, he says it, that the art of alchemy is the art that imitates nature most closely. He's sort of referring to the fact that, well, you can paint a picture that reproduces the world, you can make a 3D replica of it with sculpture, but alchemy is the art that chemically replicates how nature creates. Basically, alchemy is the art of transforming natural matter into man-made materials in the service of human needs. So basically, my tagline is that alchemy was a science. It was tinged with spirituality and infused with a spritz of artistic spirit. I'm sure, hopefully you guys walked through the exhibition before, but we sort of, we started out in the first section, alchemical creation, both looking at the origins of the field of alchemy, how the field came to be, how it was created, and also just sort of concepts of creation, thinking about God as the creator, as a creative artist. In fact, in this one, you've got chaos being transformed into the cosmos. And I will say that in ancient Greek, cosmos means order. It also means adornment, ornamentation. Creating the cosmos is creating a work of art. And in fact, up here in Latin, it says this is a picture of art as a mirror of all of nature, in actually bad Neo-Latin. And you've got, actually, I'm not going to go through this slide because we'll be here for 2 or 3 hours. Various depictions that you find in different alchemical books show God as an artist in creating the world. Here he's wielding calipers just like any sculptor, painter, draftsman. Here he's a glass maker, blowing up the glassy orb of the world, and he's kind of breathing his divine spirit. He's breathing pneuma in Greek, ruh in Hebrew or Arabic. He's animating the world. Pneumatic engine, basically animating the world, giving spirit, putting spirit into the substance. When you think of animating, well, the Latin word for soul is anima. That's where we get animated from. What we traditionally know as alchemy, what sort of the traditional historical line that it follows, tends to come out of a Greco-Egyptian blend after Alexander the Great conquers Egypt in 331, 332 BC. And after his death, his successors established the Museion, the place of the musy thing, the place of the muses, the patron goddesses of the arts, otherwise known as the Library of Alexandria. So the first museum was a research institute. Thomas, hold that line. Sorry, that was my director, the director of GRI I was talking to. And so I sort of wanted to look at these elements of Greek natural philosophy and how they come together with 3 millennia of Egyptian science and spirituality. And in the 5th century, Sicilian Greek philosopher Empedocles, who's an older contemporary of Socrates, says there are 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. These are the primal matters of the world, and they're particles. They're made up of tiny, indivisible particles. And the Greek word for indivisible or uncut, atomos, is where we get the word atom. What was particularly interesting to me is that he likens the composition of the 4 elements to a painter mixing paints. And the word that's used for mixing the technical material that you use, the pigment, are pharmaca. They're drugs. Now, Plato and Aristotle come up with the idea that these atoms of the four elements have shapes, and they shape them like polyhedra, right? So a cube, water is 20-sided, a cosahedron, air is an octahedron, fire a tetrahedron or pyramid. And what's interesting, though, is that if you take these four shapes, no matter how much you put them together, the idea is that they interlock infinitely, just the way a painter would mix colors. But no matter how much you put those four together, you can't make a sphere. And so both Plato and his student Aristotle hypothesized that there is a fifth element named Milojovovich. No, that's not what you... People don't watch TV? What kind of scholars are you? You don't go to the movies? The fifth element, ether, of which the heavens are composed, and that's shaped, its atom is a dodecahedron, and then with that fifth element, basically, you can compose a sphere. And so what we did in the exhibition was to show that idea with this, thank you, Jörg Vollnagel, the head of exhibitions and research and projects at Staatlichen Museen zu Berlin, who made sure that we could get this. It's a 20-sided crystal that was found in the tomb of a young girl north of Rome in the 1st century, and it always kind of makes me cry when I see it. And it was placed in the tomb of this young girl. Did I just say this sentence? Placed in the tomb of a young girl north of Rome in the 1st century, probably by her parents, as this memorial token of art for her travels through the river of the underworld. And from 1509, this printed book by Luca Pacioli, who was the chief mathematician for the Sforzas in Milan, it's really composed in 1498, has woodcuts of the four earthly elements, and that one is a water crystal, a water atom. That's done by this obscure artist named Leonardo da Vinci, and basically what is being represented is that you can render the three-dimensional world in perspective on a two-dimensional plane. So you basically have this mathematical model for envisioning the world, and you also have an artistic method for visualizing the world. A little bit about Egypt, what the Greeks encounter, and it's really simplistic to say that it's after Alexander the Great establishes the city of Alexandria. But for the Egyptians, their mythology is drawn from their observations in nature. Their verb, cheper, to transform, to create, to come into being, was based on their observation of how a creature in the world engineered its survival. And the scarab beetle or the dung beetle, it would lay its eggs in horse dung, camel dung. My favorite is to just say donkey dung, and roll it into a ball and bury it in the sand. And when it heats up and they hatch, the putrefying, the decaying feces become the nutrients, their first meal. What a way to greet the world. So in Egyptian mythology, the divine scarab beetle, Hepera, the transformer, the creator, transformer, sorry, I couldn't help it. Basically the image is that he rolls decay through the underworld at night, and every morning he is resurrected and reborn anew with the sun. So this idea that you can take the natural matter of the world and transform it into something new. You also sort of have this obvious parable that nature can literally turn crap into gold. The Egyptians, what the Greeks encounter is really 3 millennia of very sophisticated metallurgy, synthetic pigment production, any sort of techne that they would say in Greek that the Egyptians were engaged in. By the second millennium BC, they have figured out you can take malachite and heat it and get copper out of it. They're just doing all the smelting and alloying of metals. This from the Getty Villa. Her name is Isadora. So during the Roman period of Egypt, her mummy wrappings were often painted in this synthetic pigment that was called red lead. It was a lead carbonate. And the Egyptians knew that lead was toxic and you shouldn't eat it, and meant that it was also toxic to rats, mice, insects. So it not only gives this cosmetic sense, that you can use these pigments to immortalize the memory of a human life artistically, but you can also literally preserve the body. And much earlier on, and this is in Berlin, that the synthetic lead compound coal, which it then gets transliterated into Arabic as alcohol, and is ultimately where we get the word alcohol. That it was used as an eyeliner to keep insects away from your eyes, and was also one of the earliest writing inks. So in some ways you can't overemphasize the contribution of alchemy to the history of art. The Art of Alchemy is responsible for the creation of cements, for writing inks, for paints, effects in glass. Ultimately, the chemical washes used in lithography, etching, ultimately photography, and even the liquid crystal displays of today. So actually, if I go back for a second, Egypt, the Egyptians' own name for Egypt was Kem. It meant black or rich, in the sense of rich, fertile, these minerals that would build up during the flood season on the banks of the Nile. And what shows up around the 3rd century of our era is this practice. We see recipes for this practice of chemeia. And everybody argues about the etymology of this word. Chemeia in Greek, cheo means to pour, and chemeia meant metal pouring, metal smelting, metal alloying. Whether it really derives from the Greek cheo or it's coming from this Egyptian, that is the Egyptian art that you do at Kem, is up for debate. But it's something that does develop at Alexandria in Egypt in around the 3rd century. And it not only spawns this kind of artisanal culture of synthetic decorative artworking, but is given sort of this philosophical underpinning by the writings of the semi-mythical figure named Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes 3 times the greatest. There he is from the Manly Hall collection, drawing the geometry of creation of male and female. This from the Villa, there's Hermes lecturing Ptolemy of Alexandria, the most famous astronomer, cosmographer, geographer. His books and star maps are printed until the 17th century, and Hermes is lecturing him about the nature of the cosmos over a globe. This woman is labeled skepsis, which in Greek is inquiry, and this woman pointing up at that headless figure, which this is at the Villa, and everybody, that we all kind of think that that's supposed to be Jesus Christ. It's supposed to be Christ in majesty. And Hermes Trismegistus's writings, basically his prime proposition is that all substance has soul. It exists in everything. So in a sense, he gives this theoretical underpinning, a matter theory for this artisanal practice of chemeia, metal pouring. But also what you get in this plate, 6th century, probably the earliest depiction we know of Hermes Trismegistus, is this mix of Greek pagan philosophy, Egyptian science, and also Judeo-Christian monotheism coming up. Now, everybody, Egyptologists and sinologists always like to argue about who first came up with a synthetic pigment. And here is a mineral that occurs naturally and is very ubiquitous in China, especially in Western China, near Dunhuang. And it's called Cinnabar. And Cinnabar is a combination of mercury and sulfur. It's mercury sulfide. And what you get in this 17th century woodcut is this process of crushing up cinnabar and then heating it up in a furnace. The mercury evaporates before the sulfur does, and you can separate out mercury and sulfur. We'll get back to mercury in a bit, but sulfur also had many applications, but one of them is described by Wei Boyang in the 2nd century, a Taoist alchemist, who says that sulfur is the prime ingredient in something he calls huo yao, the fire drug, by which he means gunpowder. So alchemists also invented gunpowder. The earliest Alexandrian alchemist who's known by name, whose writings survive, my mother, Maria Judea, is credited with the invention of all these things by this guy Zosimus, but it's Zosimus' works who survive, maybe in 3 Greek manuscripts and 1 Arabic translation or version of it. That's at the Library of Congress, a couple of Syriac I don't want to ask the people that are speaking tomorrow. I'm also afraid of making a mistake in front of them. But it's really when this practice of chemia, with the advent of Islam, that Greco-Egyptian alchemy and the sort of Central Asian, East Asian, this mix on the Silk Road begin to combine, and there's just this explosion of creativity in Islam. And in fact, I mean, most elementarily, it's where we get the word alchemy. Chemia is transliterated in Arabic as alchemia, and hence in Latin is alchemia. My bro crush, Muhammad ibn Zakaria Irazi from Rai, Iran, really just completely changes the game. He says that sort of this 4-element theory of the Greeks is absolutely useless in a lab. It's like great fire, air, earth, water. You take earth and water and blend them together and you get mud. Eureka. And especially in a book of his, let's call it Kitab Asir al-Asrar, the book of the secret of secrets. And it does exactly the opposite. It's this very matter-of-fact, straightforward excursus that demystifies the field of alchemy and breaks things up into like substances, apparatus, and procedures. And he really is the father of modern chemistry. Among the substances that he works with are vitriols, which basically mean corrosives. Our word vitriol really comes from the Latin, from, I guess, I keep thinking of an Italian, vetro. What is it in Latin? Vetrum? Glass. And what happens when, Irazi invents hydrochloric acid, I believe, and he can create these corrosions on metals that make these little glassy crystalline accretions that come out of it. You get blue vitriols, green vitriols, etc. And this really allows for this huge explosion in making lots of artistic effects in art. You notice that he says, you can't be a philosopher until you've produced an alchemical transmutation. I do want to mention that in Iran today, not today, but in Iran still today, August 27th is Irazi Day. It's National Pharmacy Day in Iran, so we should all get back together on that day and celebrate it. He establishes, I think, the first hospital in Iran, the first public institutional hospital. But a later physician-philosopher, Ibn Sina, says when Irazi meddles in metaphysics, he should have left it alone. He should have just stuck to examining patients' urine and stool specimens, and there he is, examining urine. There's still a global trade in it today. You can get blue vitriol from Alibaba.com. You can't get more than 200 tons per year, so use it sparingly. I keep wondering, like, are these bath crystals? We'll get back to pharmaca later. But basically, one thing we did in the first section of the show was to put out examples that illustrate this idea of using alchemy for art to imitate nature. And something that has always struck me, and I think strikes any of us, that anybody who comes to this lecture, anybody who gives this lecture and does this exhibition, like, who thinks of taking sand and heating it up until it turns into glass? Who thinks of taking a green rock like malachite and heating it up and somehow extruding copper from it? Science does create miracles, and it's part of this idea of alchemy's not only creative expression, but its spirituality, is that it does manage to extract from nature what God wants you to find, in a sense. So you've got from Roman Empire, probably in the 1st century, what's supposed to be it's a cosmetics jar, or a drug jar, that looks like it's made out of agate, a semi-precious mineral. Everybody wanted agate for jewelry. If you were J. Paul Getty and you really had a villa at Pompeii, you would want to line the pavement of your floors with agate. This is not agate. It's glass that looks like it. It's a cheap imitation that's made in a lab. This was used in a lab. This comes from Mid-Wilshire corridor from LACMA, but 9th century Iran. And the color effects in it are not intentional. It's probably sand abrasion. What you would want is for it to be transparent. And it really is generally under Islamic alchemists that they master the idea of making transparency in glass. And the reason you want a transparent vessel in a laboratory environment, and this comes from an expert who got suspended for not going to chemistry class, is you want to be able to observe color change. But back to Erazi's vitriols, this glass bowl that was made in Murano in the Renaissance, around in the 16th century, looks like chalcedony, this purplish brown rock, but it's laced with all these little vitriol crystals in it, and you get that effect. You get that effect when you put the light to it. In the second section, alchemy and creativity, I thought for tonight I would just get across the idea of alchemical warfare for creativity. Creation comes naturally to nature. It's in its nature. So is destruction. Procreation is in human nature, so is annihilation. Somewhere in there is also this human creative urge. And what is being depicted in this sort of Perso-Mongol Shahnameh, history of princes, is Alexander the Great fighting King Porus of India. And what Alexander is using, these charioteers here, they're not people. These are just iron shells. They're automata. They're filled with kind of a proto-napalm. It's like naphtha. I think Marco Polo in late 13th century talks about seeing the fire fountains of Baku in Azerbaijan. And so basically these are iron shells that are filled with this flammable liquid, kind of like gasoline, and you light them and they propel the thing. And they're also shooting out from their nozzles the same naphtha or bitumen might have been used, both highly flammable, but it's mixed with these sticky resins, tree resins. So it's sort of like spurts out, covers everybody that's that's in its path, and then when the chariot kind of crashes into it, the whole thing explodes into a fireball. It's all very creative. But what's particularly interesting about this is that all of the pigments used in this miniature are synthetic pigments that you could buy on the so-called Silk Road. So it's in a sense, if you know what a nature print is, when you sort of press a leaf onto a piece of paper. I mean, this is an alchemical nature print, a synthetic print. They're using the chemicals that were made in the same laboratory well, not in the same laboratory, but with the same kind of procedures that you would use to make this proto-napalm. At the essence of alchemy is this idea of extracting essence, that you're getting the soul out of that natural matter. And what seems to be interesting for human beings is that when you're getting the soul out of matter, the soul or its essence is basically what's essential for you. It's what comes in handy for you. And what has also always interested me, and this is from that, I know it's not Nancy Turner, it is basically an allegory of distillation where you're making this red mercury. And here you just get a very simple technological illustration of the furnace and people working it. And what it says is distillatorium ad aqua vitae, a distillation of the water of life, otherwise known as elixir vitae, but aqua vitae, aquavit. They're making alcohol here. Like I said, there's something that just keeps fascinating me that I really can't put my finger on, is this artistic range of how to illustrate the science of alchemy, that there's this fetish about it, whether you're just being exacting in the depiction of the technology or you're going for this sort of outlandish image here. And this idea of getting at the spirit, getting at the soul of alchemy, is basically, I mean, I've shown you the pictures of the four polyhedra, the 5 elements that fit together according to Plato, and this idea of what is the mysterious substance that allows matter in the world to either chemically bond with each other, things to chemically bond or separate. A number of people in antiquity, but in medieval Islam and in Europe, basically claim that alcohol is sort of the philosopher's stone. It's the 5th element. As the son of a house painter, I know at the end of the day, you take turpentine, you take benzene, and you rub it on your hands, and you dissolve the bond. Alcohol, it's liquid like water. It burns, so it's got fire element. It evaporates into air. You make it out of putrefying grains from the earth, so it partakes of the 4 elements. Some people propose that it was the 5th element. But this supposed philosopher's stone, what was it? And there is this sort of lifelong search, but a search of the history of alchemy, of basically finding what are sort of the main chemical catalyst that works on all matter. Now, I showed you Cinnabar before, and you could separate out mercury and sulfur, and if you separate them out, purify them, mix them back together, you get synthetic cinnabar, this brilliant red paint pigment. Geologically, it would take 1 million years for mercury and sulfur to combine. You get to do it in the lab in maybe a number of hours. So you can do, well, you have to then field 5,000 emails to Getty Risk Assessment and Insurance to get mercury from the Getty Conservation Institute to the Getty Research Institute. Other than that, eureka. It's represented in a painting in by Cornelis Bega in the 17th century, called The Alchemist, but it was called that posthumously. And he's crushing up this red stone of synthetic cinnabar, vermilion, and there's scales. He's weighing it out for sale. Like most old master paintings, the title is given posthumously, and I always sort of have this mantra that practicing alchemy does not an alchemist make. Regardless of whether he's an alchemist or not, he certainly has the apparatus. He's not a very successful one. But what it's also evidence of is that the way that most alchemists were supporting themselves traditionally was by supplying art and pharmaceutical trades. And in a lot of cities in Europe, mostly Northern and Central Europe, apothecaries and artists shared the same guild. There are sort of three color codes to alchemy by which they express this idea of like decay to perfection, that it was nigredo, blackening, putrefaction, rotting, albedo, whitening, you purify it, and rubedo is perfection, basically based on this idea of mercury sulfur becoming vermilion. It really becomes more of a metaphor because they're not just making vermilion paint pigments. And so this idea of rubedo of sort of becomes alchemy 101, that you've sort of achieved this perfection. Here it is in a little bit more of a prepossessing image, the swamp man, Sumpfman. He's emerging from the primordial ooze. He as black, his arm is becoming white, and he's emerging towards perfection as red, while this sort of multicolored angel is about to give him this cloak of rubedo, perfection. And ultimately, the idea, the inspiration for this stems out of the Quran, in the Surah al-Hijr, the chapter of the stone, that we created man out of this fermented, decaying black mud. I guess I do want to show you one other thing, like a little art version of my research assistant and probably the co-curator of this show, Rhiannon Knoll, otherwise known as Runnin' Know-It-All, knitted me this scarf of, and I just want to make a point to you, nigredo, albedo, rubedo. Notice putrefaction is a little bit longer than perfection. Thank you, Rhiannon. Pull the wool over an old man's eyes, huh? But I would like to take a very quick opportunity to thank Rhiannon Knoll, who's absolutely one of the most brilliant scholars I've ever met, and I could not have worked on this show, finished this show without her. Thank you. You want to stand up for a second so they can watch you turn rubedo? Rhiannon Knoll. Mm-hmm. Man, I am going to pay for this tomorrow. I'm never going to get good research again. So like I say, I mean, you don't have to be an alchemist to be practicing. And in fact, by this whole idea of there being these alchemical secrets, in fact, in 1535, Christian Egenolf rushes this Kunstbuchlein, little art recipe book, out, gets it to print in time for the Frankfurt Book Fair, and even puts this little period, little glossary of alchemical symbols. I give you a little translation here. But what he wants to do is he wants to put the word alchemy in to make sure that the book sells, that it's kind of this state-of-the-art technology in Europe. One of my favorite artists, even though this is a particular example of alchemy because ours at the Getty, we have 2, LACMA has 8, I think. All of these they're counterfeits, they're later. But Bernard, the only one that's real, I think, is at the Louvre. But Bernard Palissy was a ceramic artist, and he would go into the swamps of France and capture snakes, lizards, botanical specimens, try and keep them semi-alive through various narcotic pharmacon till he got back to his potter's lab and then sort of place them in the clay with these proprietary clays that he would use and secret glazes, and then fire them, and capture them, sort of immortalize them. They're not going to decay anymore. In the exhibition, they come out at night and they chase the security guards. Ben Stiller comes running up from Brentwood. It's a lot of fun. And they open up the mercury and they drink it. But for Palissy, in the 16th century, there's this renewed interest in the Renaissance in fossils. But for them, it's part of archaeology. Fossa in Latin just means to dig up. And the thing that Palissy notes is that, well, you might decay, you might putrefy, but once bones turn to stone, they petrify, they're immortal. And for him, that's the sign of the philosopher's stone, that you can capture immortality. And it's kind of this brilliant piece where he's creating this artistic tableau that says, through the techniques that I'm using to create my art, I can represent to you how to make life immortal. The aspect that's more important to painting is what's called the alchemical rainbow, and somebody should, well, I guess if it was 50 years ago, we could start a heavy metal band. But the alchemical rainbow was also called the peacock phase. And what they said was that between the black of Negredo putrefying and the white of Albedo purifying, that every color of the rainbow appears in the vessel. And what it's sort of referring to is, in a sense, like the iridescence of an oil slick that you might see on the 101. You probably wouldn't stop on the 101 to experiment. How are you going to separate out all the different colors? But also, if you look at any decaying body, organic body, animals, you see that as the fats and oils start to liquefy, that you start getting these colors. And for centuries, and especially in Islamic alchemy labs, they are experimenting with how to use vitriols and fats and different kinds of acids and salts, etc., to be able to extract all these different colors. Basically, they're making oil paints. Alchemists invented oil paint. Something that we have never been able to display in extenso before is the Ripley Scroll. And there are about 21 of it. Ours is about 20 feet long. There are about 21, 22 Ripley Scrolls in the world. I'll tell you quickly. The only reason that we don't have a table in GRI that's big enough to spread the whole thing out. And the only reason that we could display it in extenso in the show without going over budget was recently at the museum there was the Robert Mapplethorpe show. And the more explicit photos by Mapplethorpe were put into a long black case that was mounted against the wall that would be too high up for kids to see in it. And it happened to be exactly the same size as our Ripley Scroll. And I really think Robert Mapplethorpe would have been very happy about it. This is not Santa Claus, it's Hermes Trismegistus. And what it's saying in this banderole is, here is the secret key buried in the secret source fountain that will transmute the fermented stone. So again, this obsession with coloring. The one thing that has struck me, I've tried to look at every Ripley Scroll I can in the world, which that's not a Brooklyn secret, that just means I'm weird. And it's interesting that, number one, that the substances more and more are being represented in these metaphors of little human beings homunculi in the bottle. I guess, in a sense, it's an artistic metaphor that says these substances have a soul. But spurting out of this alembic is some vaporizing spirit. And as far as I know, ours is the only one that has 3 test tubes. They usually have 1 or 2. And ours is yellow, red, and a greenish blue. And everybody has argued about when to date these different Ripley Scrolls. None of them are written during his lifetime. He dies in 1480 something. And I've always thought ours is kind of late just by painting style and paleography, but what's interesting to me is that in 1723, Jacques Leblanc, color theorist, publishes a book, Il Colorito, and he's the first to propose that there are 3 primary colors, yellow, red, and blue, which is the prevailing color theory today. And And I note that you find it in the Ripley Scroll, which leads me to think, I've never tried to date a text by color theory before, but I don't know, argue with me about it. One of my favorite things in the show, the device for distilling lunar humidity, the idea that the moon was associated with silver, and that at night sort of the silvery surface of the moon kind of precipitates and sloughs off, and that's what the morning dew is. And what you're supposed to use this device for is to take the morning dew and you can distill it down to get the silvery essence, so you can get the silver of the moon from it. The title of the book is Chemical Moonshine. And yes, that is where we get the title, where we get the word from. The idea harks back to something in, really probably as early as Babylonian period. The 7 known planets were associated with 7 known metals. And at least in Islam, Mercury is called the fickle planet, the hypocritical planet, because the orbit of Mercury looks gold, makes it look gold when it's near the sun, silver when it's near the moon. The metal Mercury, it's attracted to some metals, it's repulsed by others. We all know the feeling. But notice that there's red and white, and you've seen. Right. Now, maybe I want to just go back to this chart for a second. So Mercury is the metal mercury. Venus is the metal copper. And more, and again, like I say, I keep getting struck by this fetish to try and express science through art that permeates the history of alchemy, at least in the European tradition. You have this hermaphrodite over a fire, sort of an unnatural creation, something I'm not comfortable saying in LGBT days. But you basically, Hermes is Mercury, Aphrodite is Venus, Mercury is Mercury, Venus is copper. If you take Mercury and copper and sprinkle gold on them and heat them together, the mercury will evaporate, the gold bonds to the surface of copper or bronze, and that is mercury amalgam gilding. They're doing it in China by the 5th century BC. Here it is on the future Buddha, the Bodhisattva Maitreya, who stays on earth just out of compassion for us till we're all perfect, and he's holding an elixir of immortality, and you've got remains of mercury amalgam gilding. Christ and Majesty from Limoges, mercury amalgam gilt. Limoges is famous for its enamel, and they're really from a technique developed by Erazi of corroding metals and bonding them to glass to get that enameling. And all of these gemstones are fake; they're all glass, made with synthetic pigments. The same concept shows up in 12th, 13th century. This is a later Mughal miniature of a tantric alchemical work, the Ocean of Mercury, the Rashanava, that Shiva, the god of transformation, his semen is quicksilver. And here is his semen chasing a young woman. When Shiva copulates with his consort Parvati, in other incarnations, Devi, they don't give birth to a progeny. They just fuse into a new incarnation that is sort of hermaphrodite. That is, well, Shiva is Mercury. Parvati, her reproductive organs are a receptacle of sulfur, shall we say. And traditionally, this bindi dot on the forehead, that was a symbol that married women in India wore, is made out of vermilion and is the symbol of the chemical bonding of mercury and sulfur of Shiva and Parvati. In the last part of alchemy and creativity, we wanted to look at this idea of, I guess, this thing that I keep harping on. Alchemy in medieval Europe was called ars magna, the great art. In Islam, it was just called sana'a, the art. It was the art by which all other media of art were basically able to create their artistic creations. But more and more what you start getting in the 16th and 17th century are alchemists, at least in the book arts, they're collaborating with artists to kind of brand themselves. So I show this tableau that I understand the integrated vision of how the cosmos works, and I want to represent it in artistic form. Here's an example of it as Leonard turnized some turn. How am I doing time-wise? Am I going? Okay. Turnizer is the physician to the Elector of Brandenburg, basically the governor of Berlin. And he creates this elaborate seven-leaf work that has for each planet. And you have these volvels, these rotating devices that you can find the locations of different stars and constellations. A number of them in his work are completely made up, or he's using sort of made up Hebrew and Syriac and Aramaic names for them. But, and you know, this one says, what is it? The course and the orbit of Mercury. But what the hell is the purpose of this book? I mean, this is 1575. The world has been circumnavigated already. Nobody is going to take this book on a voyage anywhere to try and figure out like how to follow the stars. No astronomer really wants to use it. In a sense, it's a vanity piece that kind of proves his success. And the reason that he's successful is related to this book that's called The Fifth Element. And this woman here, Die ewige Heimlichkeit, is the eternal secret. And there's a lock on her mouth. She's holding a key, and the key is to this cabinet that says laudanum. And that's Latin for the thing that must be praised. And what it is laudanum, protomorphine. Everybody knew about opium for years and years. You mix it in water, it's really good. But if you use alchemical techniques to really distill down its essence, get the spirit, get its tincture, then it's 100 times more powerful. And the reason that Turnizer is such a successful physician in Berlin, also has mining interests, a staff of 1,000 for a printing press. He's like the Medellin of Berlin. He's selling, everybody has morphine prescriptions from him. But like I say, more and more you're getting sort of these images in book form of like alchemists' visions of how they understand the cosmos and how it works. And that's nowhere more true than when it applies to medicine. In Johann Remelin's anatomical book, basic anatomical flat book that up here, Yahweh, Jehovah, God, you open up the flap and Hermes Trismegistus is underneath. The woman's reproductive organs, you open up the flap and her uterus is an alchemical vessel. There's a little baby there, and her pubic hair are the fire that's heating it. So basically, what's being argued is that the world is God's laboratory, that God uses these chemical mechanisms for the creation of life, and that alchemists have begun to master it. And in fact, more and more you get this increasing use of these homunculi in books. The king is red, the queen is white here. Here I think it's supposed to be gold and silver, but you're really getting like test tube babies, that your creation in the laboratory is just like what God does in the world, and that you're trying to make it most pure. And as you can see, that in Bride of Frankenstein, James Whale is using the imagery from this book for Dr. Pretorius's experiment. I just wanted to put in this quote. I love this quote. David White, expert on tantric alchemy, will talk about it more tomorrow. Yatha lohe tatha dehe. That also comes from the Ocean of Mercury. And you see in Greek here in Johann Becher's book, Joachim Becher, to Sumpan, the totality, the all. And his representation, basically what you're seeing is sort of a surgical theater, like the curtain is being pulled open in a surgical theater, and running through the intestines are the 7 planetary metals. And Stephen Little will talk more tomorrow about the external and the internal elixirs that are used in China as a sort of a spiritual and as a medical practice. This idea, just like Palissy was looking for that, how do you capture immortality? How do you prolong life with these pharmaca that you can also use as artistic pigments? And there is, matter of fact, Marco Polo says that he's on the coast of Malabar and he saw Chugi, yogi, Indian yogi, who are drinking mercury and sulfur mixed with water, and they live for 150 years. And as Stephen has pointed out to me in Taoist alchemy, that that Chinese emperors wanted to eat off of they didn't want to eat off of gold plates, they wanted to eat off of mercury amalgam gilt plates, because what they wanted was to imitate this process of creation. And they were also administered like mercury and sulfur elixirs to try and prolong their life or to achieve immortality. And generally they do, they become immediately immortal. This is a body chart. I don't want to talk too much about this. I'm sure Stephen will tomorrow. But and it's supposed to be occupied in different organs by these immortals, these xian, that you can activate either by drinking a pharmaceutical prescription or by inner meditation. And one of them is the perfected Cinnabar baby. I really want to get this tattoo. And I just want to bring this up again because more and more you get these artistic depictions of these immortal xian living in body jars, sort of emerging vaporously from it. And I know I'm sort of approaching this as a neophyte, but I more and more sort of looking around. I mean, it's like genie in a bottle, and I sort of like looking for references, like relation between xian, these Chinese immortals, and the Arabic and Persian idea of the jinn that is semi-divine and more immortal. And I really can't find like any kind of modern scholarship on it. You? Oh, you have till tomorrow. I'll be done soon. So, in the last section, alchemical culture. Again, you still see at a pharmacy in Vienna, and in the mid-18th century, you've got Hermes hovering over the person who designs their pharmacy to make sure that Hermes, Mercury, is presiding over his apothecary shop. And you have this completely sort of ordered, organized what do I want to say? Sort of like an organized system of knowledge culled from millennia that basically allows you to buy human health straight off the shelf. And the idea of this better living through alchemy comes from the 2 earliest illustrations of what are called Wunderkammer, cabinets of curiosities, rooms of wonders. This one, the one on the left, is from Naples. It's the first illustration in any book. And the second one, this one is a woodcut. That one's an engraving, the first engraving of a Wunderkammer. They both belong to pharmacists. And both books have these long sections on alchemy in them, not just the recipes, but also this matter theory about the nature of the soul. If you can make a metal more pure, more noble through chemical experiment, then why can't you take a depraved or debased body and purify it and make its soul more noble? And basically, in both of these, you have not only just this storeroom that they're using, but basically this kind of curated showroom that shows off their organized, their knowledge of all the world's materials that you can use to ennoble the human body and and soul. And in both cases, they call these rooms museum. And that is the beginning of the modern idea of the museum and the idea of curating a museum. So alchemists also invented curating and museums, and I'm very proud to be part of that tradition. This idea that you can, ennoble the body and soul, and that alchemists have this vision of how the cosmos mechanically, through physics and chemistry works, really gives them powerful positions at court. Michael Meyer is not only the physician to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, there's a gold medal of him there, but he's also his closest political advisor. And at the same time, Michael Meyer takes, it's not Halloween, okay. He takes this tradition of the emblem book, and it's the first time I think it's ever done. He sets the poetry to music. He creates this multimedia piece. There's this sort of performance aspect in showing off not only your knowledge, but how artistically you can display your knowledge. One little thing on the side is this is in the Sculpture and Decorative Arts Department of the museum. And somebody that Nancy Turner introduced me to, Jane Bassett, conservator of sculpture, really works on metal sculpture. I called her and said, have you ever done tests on this as to whether it's pure gold or mercury alchemical gold? And I said, no, that's a good idea. And she called me back the next day in this really crestfallen voice, I'm really sorry to disappoint you, but it's 24 karat gold. And she and I are the only two people in the world that are disappointed that it's not fake counterfeit gold. So anyway, this idea of sort of representing, this grandiose tableau of your knowledge of the cosmos or the material, your success by how many alchemical ingredients and exotic materials you can gather from around the world and use them as a display also sort of leads to this kind of mockery of alchemy as this sort of newfangled, this weird pharmaceutical medicine. I think I read, I don't know if it's in your book, Stephen, or it's in Golden Peaches of Samarkand, that the Chinese emperor, they had this sort of Xanax prescription that if in cases of severe anxiety, have the emperor drink lead mixed with mercury, mixed with hydrochloric acid, and he will feel much calmer. I felt like drinking that right before this talk. So, but here you've got, here you have a homunculus. You have a doctor, well, here you have a doctor, but inside his vessel, the homunculus, the little figure, is a fool, is a court jester. He's administering to this guy wearing an alembic hood a mercury enema. He's breathing, you can see the mercury vapors emitting. He's breathing in mercury and he's emitting all the toxicities, purging himself the toxicity of the body. Apparently it's also giving him hallucinations while he is also spitting out vermin. Here, in part of a parade float in Bamberg in 1837, the idea of the curiosity cabinet has just become this portable pharmacy on wheels, but it's kind of being mocked. You've got this outsized syringe that's called a cleaster cannon. I'm going to let you look that up for yourselves. By the time you get to the Enlightenment, this is sort of when alchemy gets turned into a pseudoscience. For Diderot and people like that, and Diderot's Encyclopédie, alchemy is it's the rise of the modern university. In the 18th century, it's no more natural philosophy. Chemistry, physics have their own departments. Theology has its own department. The spirit is sort of extracted from it. And what he says, he's still using alchemical symbols for the chemical ingredients that you would use, the active ingredients you'd use in any experiment. But he just sort of demystifies it and says, they're just technicians that know the formulas that you don't know. And we're also leaving spaces blank for other substances that are found in the future. Okay, I just wanted you to take a break. Problem with alchemy was Ingrid Rowland, an art historian. Her daddy is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who said to her when she was a kid, like, alchemists didn't have it wrong. They just didn't have the right power source. How much can you heat up something in an iron crucible, an iron beaker, without it finally melting? Once you harness electricity, it's a game changer. And in, was it 1879, Sir William Crookes applies electricity to gases, and they get superheated, and you get a fourth state of matter. You have solid, liquid, gas. Now you have what's called plasma, a ancient Greek word for the formed thing, the same word we get plastic from. The plasma globe is really patented by Tesla in 1894. And Nikola Tesla, who of course wanted to give electricity away for free, Thomas Edison, Westinghouse kind of put a stop to that. Tesla has this long-standing interest in alchemy, and he takes mercury, puts it into a glass tube, sucks all the air out of it to make a vacuum, and introduces electricity. The tube turns black, and then there's this burst of all these colors, and then it stabilizes into purple. So in some sense, first you get this kind of from Negredo, you get this chemical rainbow, and then that superheated mercury vapor that gives you this purple light is the fluorescent light bulb. And that's why you can't throw fluorescent light bulbs away, because they have mercury in them, but they're much more long-lasting than others, and part of Tesla's ongoing attempt to try and service human needs. This relationship between like apothecaries and artists from antiquity on, from the earliest time that we can find, still manifests itself in the industrial age. These textile printing samples, where you've just taken fabric and covered it with olive oil, like the Greeks would, and used these synthetic inks to get this radiant, this efflorescence of it. Pomet's History of Drugs. The reason in the 18th and 19th century that most mummies were being looted from tombs was not for museums. They were being sold to pharmacies, because basically, well, if whatever chemicals were in the mummy helped preserve it, then maybe if you sort of distill it down, get its essence, boil it down to this purified brown resin, that it was kind of like, you thought it was kind of a Botox, that basically if you took a prescription of brown mummy powder, that you would live longer. It also made a really nice brown paint pigment. And still in the 19th century and in the 20th century, artists went to pharmacists to buy their paints from them. I will just add right here, Julia Herschel, the daughter of John Herschel, who coins the term photography and comes up with the technique of cyanotype or the blueprint, has made this, and it's made from Prussian blue, which you can also use. They discover later that it's a cure to heavy metal poisoning, listening to too much AC/DC. Also, I was worried about putting this in the gallery for 4 months, and conservators told me that when you close it and put it back in the vaults, that Prussian blue in this chemical technique of cyanotype, that it restores itself. It basically resurrects itself to a deep blue. I got to get going. Okay, bye. Michel-Eugène Chevreul, probably the leading color chemist of the industrial age. If you look him up in chemistry books, they say he's famous for his work on fatty oils and lipids and acids. They don't mention anything that he does with color. What Chevreul is always obsessed with is true colors, that he can faithfully reproduce in printing the same colors over and over and over. It's like WYSIWYG, that what you get in the color monitor, you're going to get in your printer. And he is playing with the same thing. It's a technique that has been passed down since Arazi, and he reads lots of alchemy books. He lives to be 107. At 95, he decides, like, I've been playing with the idea of like decay and putrefaction and how you create vivid synthetic colors all of my life. Maybe I should use my own decay to experiment with, and starts taking pieces of skin cells and doing laboratory tests with them. And he comes up with the term for what he's doing. He calls it gerontology. It's Chevreul, the color chemist, who comes up with the study of aging. Gerontology. I just had to put this in, that these aniline coal tar lake pigments, that basically what you're extracting from petroleum, petroleum, the oil from a rock, is that you're getting the essence of this coal by which you can make these synthetic pigments. This sample book comes from Friedrich Bayer, und Gesellschaft, that's Bayer aspirin. That's how they made their money first in 1853. They develop aspirin, then they diversify into making all these synthetic pigments that are all very stunning and incredibly toxic. In 1897, their chief color chemist comes up with a better painkiller than aspirin. This bottle is from 1925, but in 1897 they patent heroin, and they say it makes a great cough suppressant for children, and that it also got you off of addiction to laudanum, to that 16th century proto-morphine. And then some graduate student, like, a generation later says, excuse me, professor, but this is morphine. And also the development of plastics. I won't go that far into it except to say, and Rhiannon and I are still not sure if this is really an urban legend, but this combination of like a milk protein, casein, mixed with formaldehyde and synthetic pigments to make a protoplastic, they still today call milk plastic the basic substance that you use in 3D printing. But first it's used to imitate ivory for piano keys, bone for umbrella handles. Coco Chanel sees this stuff and has a line of costume jewelry design, wears it with her signature black dress to a Paris runway show. I don't know, did I make this up, Rhiannon? No? Okay, good. All right. I'll wear my scarf more often, I promise. And there's just this huge sensation. So just like the Romans are using glass to try and imitate agate, plastic has this explosion for sort of more of a middle class commercial world of making costume jewelry. I forgot how I still have to. I guess I don't have time to really tell the stories about this. I will say about this copy that this copy belonged to Chevreul, the French textile color chemist. Der Bildungstrieb der Stoffe. Runge is the chief color chemist in Berlin, and as opposed to Chevreul, what Runge is interested in is proving that you can use color to prove truth. What he does is he gives you these formulas, and if you consistently use the same proportions and drip them onto blotter paper, that it always is going to make the same pattern. And that means that nature has this urge for like art, order, and form. Bildungstrieb der Stoffe means stuff's drive for pattern or formation. The Runge doesn't want to be accused of tampering with his experiment, and he likes teaching, so he has little kids do the little drips on the blotter paper. And when you, like, some of the ingredients are potassium cyanide that they use in gas chambers. This says sulfuric acid and potassium manganese oxide. It's probably when homeschooling was started in Germany, was sort of right after this. But he's the father of medical chromatography. You sort of get this sort of difference in approaches to color for, like I say, for Chevreul, he wants reproducible colors for the arts industry. For Runge, he doesn't really care what color it is. He wants to show that color is a proof of truth in reality, and it's still used in medicine today. By the end of the 19th century and the 20th century, things that Arazi is experimenting with in the 9th century, and now that you've got really well-developed microscopes, I think it's in 1888, that Otto Lehmann, a physicist, creates these liquid crystals. He calls them Rao crystals, pourable crystals. He looks at them under a microscope. They look like these form of protozoa. And he thinks he really has created synthetic life in the test tube. They respond to stimuli, whether it's chemical or electric. That one's electric. And by 1920, Ernst Haeckel, a scientific illustrator, in his last book, Crystal Souls, gives you this frontispiece of flowing crystals, flüssige Kristalle, liquid crystals. And a collaboration between Tsinghua University Press and the Science and Technology University of China made this incredible website, beautifulchemistry.net, that said, in homage to Ernst Haeckel, we want to show you the artistic beauty of chemical creation, and we want to do it on LCDs, on liquid crystal displays. Liquid crystal displays are the canvas and palette of the digital age. Every TV, every computer, every iPhone, etc. And the major producer, almost the sole producer of liquid crystals for all of those devices is Merck Pharmaceuticals, which has been doing it since 1888. So it's still the pharmacists that are making the art for you. And I guess sort of the last thing that I really want to say is I just still have not gotten over what is it that I do want to say? It's like in every chemist and probably in every artist, there beats the heart of an alchemist. This sort of supposed, this idea that you tinker and toy with elements, materials, known and unknown, just hoping for that one sublime moment of rubedo, eureka, this inspirational moment where you have made your creation is perfect, whether as an artist or as a scientist. I think, in a sense, it's something that goes through the 19th and 20th, or in the 19th century, and with Haeckel, Haeckel says these liquid crystals prove that every substance, even inorganic ones, minerals, they have a soul. You're back to Hermes Trismegistus in the 1st century. When Runge is experimenting, actually when he's a graduate student, he meets Goethe. And Goethe is writing this romantic novel called Wahlverwandtschaft, elective affinities, that the same chemical, that the reason some chemicals want to bond or they want to repel each other it's the same reason that humans fall in love, that there is this chemical urge. And this whole mystery of alchemy, somewhere at its heart, is really this romance of the senses, that you're just getting in and playing with this stuff until you've made the perfect creation, instead of it blowing up in your face. Well, sometimes you want it to blow up in your face if it's military applications. And as much as we would just like to say alchemy is just the ancestor to chemistry, alchemy is a little bit more like instant chemistry. It's like that instant chemistry of like love at first sight that's just sparked by this instant attraction, that there are just some things that science just can't explain. I think I'll leave it there, okay? Thanks so much.